Today, we're going to talk about a few things, but the first thing is the user input into an array and just kind of how that works. First thing I'm going to do is create an array that just holds 3 ints. And I know I want 3 ints, I just don't know what they are yet. We're going to read those from the user. New ints of 3. So now I have an array of size 3, but I haven't decided what they are. I'm going to go up to the top and import my java.util.scanner. So I'll print out the user that I want them to enter 3 grades, or enter 3 numbers. And then I'll read them one at a time. So I'll do num0 equals keyboard.nextInt, and then I'll just duplicate that and do it for 1, duplicate that and do it for 2. After that, I can print them all out. So I'll print out 0, print out 1, and print out 2. So now on the right, I get this prompt to enter 3 numbers, I enter whatever I feel like, and I get those printed back out to me. Whatever I entered, the program's just going to read them in, store them in the array, and then print them back out. Here we're doing 0, 1, 2, reading nextInt, putting it into an array, and then we're printing them all out. But we're doing something repetitive here. And whenever we're just like copying and pasting the same line or the same couple lines, doing it over and over again, what's a better way to do that? A for loop. Instead of 0, 1, 2, we can just have int I equals 0, and then while I is less than nums.length plus I, and then we'll just keep one of these and change that 0 to an I, so that assigns the ith element now. So that'll be 0 the first time, then 1, then 2. To that element, and then we're going to do the same thing for the printing. For int I equals 0, I is less than nums.length plus I, and then change that num0 to a nums I and delete the other 2. So now instead of reading into 0, then 1, then 2 explicitly, you can just go over the length of the array. And I get the same output, the same input. So my program's doing the same thing now. The only other thing I would touch up here is changing this from enter 3 numbers to just say enter nums.length numbers. Still get the same output. This is also set up so it's not specific to 3 now. I can change this to 5 up here. New int 5. Run this, type in some stuff, and I'll get all 5 numbers echoed back out to me. The last step here is to make the length of the array itself vary so the user can decide how big this array should be. So instead of 5, I'm going to ask the user, simple as that, and then I'll read in size variable from the keyboard. And I'll change this 5 to be size. So now whatever the user says here on that line for nextInt will go into the size variable. That will decide the size of the array. So if I say 2, then it's going to ask me to enter 2 numbers. So I say 5 and 10, and I get 5 and 10 printed back to me. If I say I want to enter 4 numbers, I'll say 4, 6, 20, and 3, and I get all those printed back out to me. The size of the array itself is decided by the user's input. And that's as far as I want to go with this example. Just replace the 5 or the 3 or whatever number you had with the size. Instead of being a number, it's actually going to be a variable deciding the size. So let's talk about everyone's favorite homework so far, which is the pyramid problem. The solution to this involves something called a nested loop. A nested loop is when you have a loop inside of another loop. This term nested just means one inside of another. So a nested if is an if inside of an if. Nested loops can be a for loop inside of a for loop. It can be a while loop inside of a for loop, a while inside of a while, for instead of a while, whatever. It just means one loop inside of another. So the way I'm going to do this to start is I'm going to create just a function called print pyramid. So instead of returning the string, I'm just going to print it. I think I've said this before, but there's print line, like print out line, and there's print. If you just do print, it doesn't add a new line at the end of it. So since that first one just says print and it doesn't say print ln, these two, first and second, will show up right next to each other. Now it's going to be important for printing the pyramid. So now I'll go in and I'll write public static void print pyramid. This function will take the height of the pyramid. So now if I have, for example, I want to print a pyramid with a height of 4, that's going to look like this. And then we have to do it in the opposite direction, but we're just going to worry about the first part of it, because if you can do the first part, you can do the second part. So the nested loop, we're going to have one outer loop that's going to be responsible for the height of it. So it's just going to make sure we go in this direction the right number of times, this way. Our inner loop is going to be responsible for drawing the right number of stars horizontally. So we're going down. The first step, we need to draw 1. The second step, we need to draw 2. The third step, we need to draw 3, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to create a for loop, just because I kind of happen to know this is going to work out. I'm going to start I at 1, and I'm going to go while I is less than or equal to the height, plus I. Now I know I also have to have an inner loop. I can't use I again, so I'm going to use j for the inner loop variable. This is just convention. For int j equals 0, some condition, I don't know what yet, plus j. Now I know this inner loop is the thing that's actually responsible for printing the stars. So I'm going to put a star in here. And I know this outer loop is the thing that's responsible for printing the new lines. So I'm going to print an empty string, which is just going to print a line break. The way I want this to work is that each time I come into the inner loop, it prints 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So what could my condition be here? So that the first time I enter this loop and I run this loop, it runs once. And the second time I run this loop, the whole thing runs twice. And then the third time I run the loop, it runs 3 times. So we're going to compare j is less than I here. And I get the first half of my pyramid. Confused? Don't worry, because we're going to step through this. So we're going to come into this print pyramid function. We have height equals 4, so I'll write that down. 4. Then I hit line 5. I create a variable I set it equal to 1. I compare I is less than or equal to height. Height is 4, so that is true. We enter our for loop, we hit line 6. Line 6 creates a variable j and it sets it equal to 0. Next, we compare j to I. Is j less than I? That's true. So we go to line 7 and we print out a single star. So I'm going to draw this line here. So this is going to be the output. Then we add 1 to j. So j becomes 1. We check the condition again. J is less than I. True or false? Is 1 less than 1? It's equal to, so it's false. So that inner loop's condition, j is less than I, is false. We're done with that inner loop now. After we get past that brace on line 8, the j itself just kind of goes away. That variable disappears. And then we do a print line with those quotes, which is just going to print a new line. So I'll draw that with the \n. Now we're at line 10, which is the end of the first loop, the outer loop. So we jump from line 10 back to line 5. Now we do our update. What's our update? Plus I, which is going to raise I from 1 to 2. What happens after we raise I to 2? So then we check condition 2. We're comparing that value I2 to the height 4. So it's true. So that means we re-enter the outer loop. And we come down to line 6. Here's the tricky part. What happens on line 6 now? J is not 1 actually. We're starting this whole loop, the whole process of that inner loop over again. So we create a new J now. It's not the same J as the last time. It's a new J and we're setting that equal to 0. So every time we come around the outer loop, that inner loop gets reset. So J equals 0 and then we say J is less than I. True or false? J is less than I is true. So we go down to line 7, we print an asterisk. After we print that asterisk on line 7, where do we go? Well, we're in this loop here. So we do this on line 7 and we hit this closing brace. This closing brace closes which loop? So yeah, the inner loop. So when we're at the end of that loop, where do we have to go? So when we hit the end of a loop, what do we always do? We go back to the start of the loop and we do our update because we're in a for loop. We're gonna do plus j and we're gonna get j equals 1. What happens now? We just did plus j, we have j equals 1. We're on line 6. We did plus j, so it went from 0 to 1. After our update, what do we always do? Check the condition. We compare j to I now. J is 1, I is 2. J is less than I is true this time. So we come back into our loop and we print a star. So we update j, get 2, and then we check the condition. The condition again, j is less than I. They're both 2, so that condition is false. So we exit the inner loop only. So now we're done with that inner loop. Or you know what happens after that. So we checked this condition and we got that this was false. So if this is false, we skip this part, right? Before that though, because we have to go to a line immediately after the loop. This is just an empty string. It's just 2 quotes, so it'll print a new line. That's all, just a line break. So we print our line break, and then what? We go back to 5. What happens here? We add 1 to I, and we get 3. And since we exited that inner loop, that j is just gone again. So the j value doesn't persist. Going on next. The j is gone. We just incremented I. We got I equals 3 now. After we do our update, what do we do? So we have to do the condition. We always have to check condition after our update step. So we do 3 less than or equal to 4. True or false? True. So we go back inside of this loop again. Line 6. We create a new j, set it equal to 0. Check the condition. 0 less than 3 is true. So we come inside the loop and we print out a star. After we print out that star, where do we go? We're going to jump not to line 5. Line 5 is the outer loop. So we came in here, we printed the star. That brings us to this brace. So we're going to come back up to this line and look for that update. We do plus j. J goes from 0 to 1. Then we check our condition. J is less than I. This is going to be true or false? True. Good. So then we will print one more star. We come back into the loop, and on line 7, we hit that print line, which prints a single star again. So we have 2 total stars for this inner loop run so far. We're still inside of this. Line 6, right. So what's our update step? Plus j is the update step. So we're going to raise j to 2. After the update, what do we do? All right, so we're checking j less than I, seeing if that's true. Is that going to be true or false? So that condition is true. What happens after that? We're going to print a star. We're going to go to line 6, and we're going to do our update. Add 1 to j, and then we're going to check our condition. J is less than I. Is that true or false? So j is less than I is now false. So then we're done with the inner loop, and we come to the line right after the inner loop, which is line 9. So what is line 9 going to do? Print a new line. Yes, print a break line. All those are right. And that j goes away. So since we hit the bottom of this loop now, we printed this. Now we're at this brace. Since we hit that brace there on line 10, where do we go back to? We go to line 5, right. What do we do on line 5? What do we have to do when we're at the top of a for loop? When we get to the bottom of a for loop, what's the next step? We go back up, and then what do we do? It's the update, right. So what's the update step here? Plus I. So we raise I from 3 to 4. And then we check our condition. I is less than or equal to height. Is that true or false, class? True, because I said less than or equal to. So we're still true, so we come back in on line 6. Let me try to just walk through this quick. We're on line 6. We create a new j again. We set that equal to 0. We check j is less than I. That's true. 0 is less than 4. So we come into the loop and we print an asterisk. That's line 7. Line 8 brings us back up to line 6 again. We do our update and our condition. So we update j from 0 to 1. Condition is still true, so we go to 7, prints out an asterisk, go to 8, which brings us back up to 6. We do our update step again. We check the condition. J is less than I, 2 is less than 4, still true. We come back to line 7, print another asterisk, hit the bottom of the loop again, jump back up to line 6, increment j. J goes from 2 to 3. Check condition. J is less than I, true again. We go in again, we print an asterisk again, hit the bottom of the loop, takes us back up to line 7. We do plus j. J goes from 3 to 4. Check the condition. J is less than I. Now that's false, so we're out of that loop. That brings us to line 9. We print that line break. That j goes away. Come back up to the top of the outer loop, line 5, plus plus I. So now I is 5, height is 4. So that condition, I is less than or equal to height, is now false. This is what we have as our printed result. Each time you come inside of this for loop, you're doing whatever is inside of it. The entirety of the loop is inside of the for loop. So that means that the entire process of running a loop happens every time we come in. Every time we come in, we're starting the loop over again. We're starting as if it hasn't run at all yet. So it's like a new J. It's a different J every time. Every time we come through the outer loop, we're hitting that inner loop, sort of like we're hitting the loop for the first time again. And the first time we hit it, we always say J equals 0. This step runs the first time we run this loop, every time we come around the outer loop. So that's why I'm like erasing the J every time, because once we get past this brace, that J variable, the old one, just goes away. We don't have access to it anymore. If I tried to like print J down here, I'm going to get a cannot find symbol because the J doesn't exist there because it's part of this loop. Outside of that loop, it's invisible. It's like accessing a thing from another function. It's just gone. The idea here is run this once, then run this twice, then run this 3 times, then run this 4 times. So you need that nested loop structure to get that. It's the first side of the pyramid, and it doesn't return the string. If you want to return the string, you have to build it up. Like you'd have to have a plus equals on some string variable. Add stars and add new line characters to it every time. The next thing I want to talk about is something that will make your lives much easier in dealing with arrays. It's a new thing that some of you have seen before because I've had you work with it before. But if you are able to internalize this, it's a lot less typing. It's just easier to deal with. Conceptually, this thing is called a for each loop. I'm going to first create a double array. I'll call it nums. I just got those 3 in there. And then if I want to print them all out, int I equals 0, I is less than nums.length plus plus I, system.out.println, nums I, you know, the same thing that we've been typing over and over and over and over again. If I want to double each number in the array when I print it, I can just put a times 2 there. Nothing really new here. For each loop is a way to say that you want to do something for each element of the array instead of having to track the index itself. And the way we write that, we write for the type of each element of the array, a variable name, so I'm going to say E for element, a colon, and then the array that we're going over. And then we use E itself. So the key difference here is that E is not the index, it is the element. And every time we come through this loop, E will refer to, or E will be a copy of, in this case, the next element in the array. So the first time through, it's 3.5. The second time, it's 4.2. Next time, it's 3.7. It's not an index, it's the element itself. If I want to do that same thing where I multiply by 2, I just do E times 2, and I get the same output. Just as something to help you understand, if you understood the array indexing method really well, but this seems confusing, it is almost like you're doing the same thing, int I equals 0, I is less than nums.length plus I, and then saying like double E equals nums I at the top of the loop, and then running the rest of the loop body. You get the same effect. So you're iterating over the array, and you're just getting each element one at a time to work on, so you just don't have to do the indexing thing. If you have an array of integers, then you use int here. The way you read this is for each double E in nums, so you can almost read the colon as the word in. If you had an array of ints, then yes, you would use int, and I'll show that in a second. If you had an array of strings, you would use string. It would be the same thing you would do in this style of loop with the indexing, where you would say like if nums I is greater than 4, then print it. The same thing would kind of happen here, except instead of nums I, you would say E. All right, so I'm going to redo something like one of the midterm problems. I'm going to write a function that takes an array of ints and it counts the number of 2's that are present in the array. So public static int count 2's, array of ints, array. So the same thing we would normally do is reinitialize our count to 0. We are going to now do a for each loop instead of a regular for loop. So for int I in array, or int E in array, I'm saying int now because the type of the array is int. So the type of each element is int. If E equals 2, plus plus count. And then at the bottom, I return the count. And then I can just print out the count 2's of nums here, and we get 3, as expected. A for each loop won't let you change the elements in the array, like it won't let you assign to them. Regular for loop, you would say, like with the first example we did, assigning to the things, I could say nums I equals something, and that'll change the array. But since each thing here is just a copy of the current element, assigning to E won't change what's in the array. So if you want to modify the contents of the array, you still need to use indexing. But if you're just doing a loop that runs through every element of the array and reads from it, then for each is usually the way to go. If you want to do something where you look at the element and the element next to it, like return true if any array contains a 2 next to another 2, then you need to use 2 indexes at once. So you would need to use the index there. You need to look at index like I and then I plus 1. If you were trying to read from the scanner and store the results in the array, anything like that that tries to modify the contents of the array, yes, you would need to use an index instead. What I would like you to do is take that contains function from the homework. So public static boolean contains, which takes the haystack and the needle, and you are going to fill this in to return true if needle is in haystack. Add a call down here to check if contains. So I'll add 2 calls here at the bottom. I expect the first one to be true. I expect the second one to be false.